Thank you for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. It is really a pleasure to be here today and quite an honor. I began to work with Kelly about a year ago, right after COVID hit, and we all went shelter in place, and the association had a roundtable discussion. I got a call from Kelly. It was our first time to meet, and we began to discuss. I participated in that conversation. I invited him subsequently to come speak to us and our organization. And of course, here we are again. And I will tell you all, this is my first trip. I was honking my horn driving out of Austin. It was so beautiful to be able to take a road trip, and the trip from Austin to here is just absolutely gorgeous. So thank you very much for having me here today. What I'd like to be able to do is talk to you about the Texas life science industry. And from a rural health perspective, maybe I could term this conversation the realm of possibility. And so it will have an economic development spin to it, but I wanted to introduce to you where we were from a life science standpoint in the state of Texas. And as it was mentioned, our organization was founded 25 years ago, and the whole focus has been really to begin to build. In fact, 25 years ago when we opened our doors, and I was part of the founding group, when we opened our doors, we were doing all of our research in academic health science centers. We were doing stellar research, and we have for decades, thanks to our Texas congressional members, we have been pulling in research dollars from the NIH, just the various federal resources, and we were commercializing that resource, and the companies we were creating were leaving. They were going to California, they were going to North Carolina. All the grads, they were going to New York. All of the grads that we were educating were leaving as well. And so our group decided to form, and it was created literally with pharmaceutical manufacturers, the biotech community, academic health science centers, the biotech community, and we have a number of stellar biotech CEOs within Texas that will not go to North Carolina or California. They decided to stay here and operate their businesses. So we really began to focus on policy and policy initiatives. Bad policy will chill innovation. And so today, with all that is going on, there's another question that I would like to ask, and that is innovation at risk within the life science industry? Because your hospitals are full of innovation. Your medical devices, we just heard and saw the video. Is it at risk, and what happens? So bad policy can chill innovation. So my goal today is really to talk to you about the life science and the medical device industry. Where is it headed, and what are the possibilities on rural health economic development? So if I could, I'll start out with medicines. And of course, medicines have literally changed our lives. Prescription medicines are there when we need them. We have and we've seen it through COVID. And I'll talk about COVID momentarily, but we can see where we have been over the last 20 years. And of course, life expectancy has increased dramatically. And so as a result of innovation today, and I have to go back to the COVID, because COVID, it normally takes anywhere from 12 to 18 years to bring a drug to the marketplace. But in COVID, we were able to do it literally under a year's time period. And of course, we're still in emergency status on these drugs, but the fact of the matter is they have been distributed, and it has been a lifesaver, literally, for all of us. In fact, during the COVID experience, we lost several family members. And so COVID hit hard in my home. And so we are thankful for, once again, the innovation, and we are thankful for the speed at which it was delivered. And also, I want to thank you all for the work, because I know during that experience and during that year of lockdown for a lot of us, you were there. And so I had a mother-in-law who passed, and she was treated in a rural hospital. And it was a good experience for our family and her to know that she was being treated with kindness and care. But ultimately, COVID was what occurred to her. So I just want to say thank you for everything that you did during this last year, and it's much appreciated, I know, from the Kowalski household in Austin, Texas. Let's move on to the economic impact and where we are today. As I had mentioned, when we opened our doors 25 years ago, June 6th will be our 25th anniversary. So it's a big month next month, and it's cause for celebration from a THBI standpoint. Today we're at 6,200 life science companies. And as I had mentioned, from an academic standpoint, our academic R&D expenditures today are literally in an arena that puts us in a class across all states in the United States. You can see here that we're spending, we're bringing in NIH funding. We've got a number of patents that we're continuing to create. We have a number of clinical trials. And I had asked this at our table in the back, are there any clinical, is anybody here doing any clinical trials in any of your facilities? Is anybody doing any clinical trials? No? Yes? Okay. So the clinical trials really has become, as a economic development driver, the clinical trial business in the state of Texas has increased dramatically. Let me show you on the next slide. This is a slide that's been put out by the Bio International organization, and it will show rankings that we have, and you can see that there are 10 quintiles that they grade all 50 states. Texas is in 6 of those quintiles, and you can see that the numbers are very healthy, and they continue to increase every year. And the companies that we're creating flowing out of the academic research that is being conducted in the state of Texas, the companies continue to increase. We just did a taping day before yesterday. Bio International's holding a convention. They hold it every year. It's the largest gathering of CEOs globally from the biotech community that will come together. This year it will be on a Zoom platform because of COVID, but there is a panel that was created for the convention itself. We pulled together members of the governor's office, myself. Are any of you all familiar with CPRIT, the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas? It's oncology based. We'll talk about that momentarily, but CPRIT has become a model in the state of Texas that is literally going to be mimicked across the country. But CPRIT itself is a $3 billion a year, a $300 million a year program. It's a 20-year program, and at the end of 20 years, we will expend $6 billion in the cancer-related field. That's been a driver for clinical trials. It's been a driver for companies being created, and it has been a wonderful driver for the state of Texas to be able to create life science companies. Let's take a look, if we can, at why we need strong policy initiatives in the state of Texas. Really, they're legislatively driven. They are federally driven, but these are some of the stats that'll show you. When we think of the life science industry, we think of big pharmaceutical companies, don't we? But if not everybody is a big pharmaceutical company, 70% of innovative clinical programs are being led by smaller companies. The 6,500 companies we have here today are literally under 100 to 50 employees. 90% of clinical programs will ultimately fail due to FDA approval. And that's where once they get into a clinical trial process, anything could go wrong, a trial could go wrong, and it can literally put a company out of business. And you can see that 92% of the biopharmaceutical companies at any given time are unprofitable. And as I had mentioned, 10 to 15 years at a rate of $2.2 to $2.8 billion to bring a drug to the marketplace. So a innovative climate is extremely important to help nurture these companies. We think Texas is the best place to do it. Now let's talk about the realm of possibility. We heard yesterday from Dr. Perriman talking about the change post-COVID and talking about where companies are going to want to relocate. And I think that there's going to be some amazing opportunities in a post-COVID environment where companies will be looking at land, they will be looking at specialized facilities, they will be looking at workforce. We've talked about workforce over the last couple of days, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But I think that Texas is well positioned at this particular point. We have a number of companies that are leaving California that are looking at other areas. And right now, I think Texas is going to be one of those Texas is one of those candidates where these companies will be relocating to. As we approach this legislative session, we looked at 5 key areas. Obviously, pandemics and infectious diseases was at the top of our list. As was mentioned by Don earlier this morning, we're still waiting for sine die to occur in another week and a half. So there are a number of bills because of the lateness in their start that we're still waiting the outcome. In fact, the budget was just approved yesterday. During this legislative session for us, it was an opportunity, I think, to help educate legislators and their staff in terms of what does it take for a healthy life science community. And we also looked at patient access and innovation. When COVID hit, one of the first things and first calls that we got was, can we still access our labs? Can we get into the laboratories? Can we get into our facilities? And there was, and this is literally, when we take a look at the state of Texas, we have a number of facilities that are not just located in one area, but the footprint for the life science industry is huge. And so there was a big concern to access labs. The other calls that we started getting were obviously PPE and the equipment, and how could they access the equipment. Those were the 2 key areas. And so as we look at a post-pandemic environment, and the rules are going to be looked at and scrutinized very closely, we're still waiting to see the governor's final list on his emergency item list and how things will pan out there. But we want to make sure that in a post-pandemic environment, we're going to be able to access those laboratories. Appropriate funding for higher education, academic health science centers, Texas Tech being a perfect example. Our academic health science centers are the crown jewels for the industry and the engine for creating, through technology transfer and commercialization, the various companies. Creating a thriving Texas life science environment. These are some of the incentives that the state offers today that has helped build the life science industry. So when the governor's office is recruiting companies into the state, these are some of the areas that they could take advantage of. Research and development and manufacturing. Our estimations are, we think that manufacturing is going to be a critical area. We have a lack of manufacturing capability in the state of Texas. And so that is one area we think could be a big plus as they build facilities and they recruit the necessary workforce to be able to handle manufacturing capability. Let's take a look, if I could, at the at offering a competitive and robust incentive program. The Texas Enterprise Fund is a fund that can be accessed. The governor utilizes it as a recruitment tool when he is recruiting companies into the state. This is somewhat at risk right now, this legislative session, although I think because it is a governor's preferred program, he's going to be able to salvage that, but it's about $100 million program. And they call it the deal closing fund so that he can be able to recruit these companies in. The Governor's University Research Initiative, this is also another program that the governor has to be able to go out and recruit the best of the best researchers and their teams into the state of Texas. And this has been a very healthy fund that the governor has utilized over the last several bienniums. The Product Development Fund and Small Business Incubator. So as companies are coming to the economic developers that are in this room, the Product Development and Small Business Incubator Loan Program, it operates like a bank. It operates in a way where you have to pledge assets, you have to pay it back. But as a young startup company, particularly in the life sciences, which are very hard to fund, by the way, the Product Development Fund is one that is easy to access, but you do have to pay it back. We had talked a little bit about CPRIT. CPRIT has just been a phenomenal program. CPRIT does several things. Number one, it matches grants. Number two, it invests in companies. So CPRIT really is allowing Texas to have equity in companies that are being created as it flows and applies for funding. And also it's doing and recruiting top-notch researchers into the state. So what GURI is doing, CPRIT is also doing. I think one of the phenomenal things with the CPRIT program is that 10% of the funding of CPRIT has to go to prevention. So the prevention mechanism has literally touched all 254 counties. There have been over 7 million prevention services to Texans. And as we had talked about the underinsured and the underserved areas, this program that CPRIT has for screening purposes has been extremely valuable. So CPRIT has had just a huge impact on the state and a huge impact in terms of helping us grow this industry. We look at R&D tax incentives. So as companies are buying equipment for research and development purposes, as they're investing in the equipment, there's a sales tax exemption, or there's an exemption against franchise taxes that these companies will pay. Key best practices. These are some of the areas that as members of the economic development team are looking at potentially building recruitment of life science companies. You can see that engage universities with active leadership is very key and critical. Building entrepreneurial clusters. How can you help these companies grow, and how about the intensive networking that would be required? Because all these companies are doing, they're looking for employees, they're looking for capital to be able to grow their companies. They're looking for discretionary federal and underfunding, and so associations with universities and academic health science centers is a very, very critical. Workforce and talent pool. We held a economic development roundtable 2 months ago, and we brought together economic developers. We brought together those that were developing parks throughout the state of Texas. We brought together members from the governor's economic development team, and we focused on what is it going to take to put Texas really in a position to land the projects as these companies are coming out of Florida, as projects are coming out of California, as projects are coming out of North Carolina. And there were two key critical areas. One is the perception of Texas, how people view Texas. I love the rattlesnake analogy this morning. I just think that was awesome. And also workforce. And how are we going to prepare our workforce over the next decade to be able to focus on these companies. And then of course, a supportive business, tax and regulatory policies, and patients in a long-term care. This is an example of life science companies, major life science companies around the Texas, and you'll find that it's not just in one local area, but the footprint is very large. So we have found wherever there is a vibrant community college system, where there is a vibrant, and Texas has 6 university systems, but every one of these university systems, with the exception of 2, have academic health science centers. We have found where there are research centers, where there are hospitals that are doing research, where there is potential to build clusters. You can see that some of the larger companies are moving in and coming in. Medical schools are also very, very critical, and selected research centers also adds to the footprint. I had mentioned clinical trials, and you can see that we're growing. This is the latest data that we pulled 3 days ago, and because Kelly wanted us to have our presentations in 3 days ago. So this is the this is the latest, but it shows us we track New York. We follow California. We're in second place. We're ahead of New York. New York and Texas tends to trade places from time to time. And but right now we're second. And I will tell you, CPRIT has been responsible for a number of the clinical trials additions that we have. COVID was also responsible for the number of clinical trials that have increased. And today, I think a goal from a THBI standpoint would be, it would be nice to have somebody access a clinical trial in their backyard versus having to travel and having to relocate family and going through the expense of hotel stays, being away from home, being away from loved ones. So I think we're slowly getting to a point where our clinical trials are going to be hopefully in your backyard. COVID industry response. So COVID was just phenomenal, and it was an impact on all of us. Industry response was amazing. And the industry, as you can see today, and these are current numbers, 858 active treatments. We know of the 3 vaccines that are available. There are more that are coming out, but vaccines and therapeutics. And then you can see on a global basis, the the industry response that's out there. So we are continuing to, one thing about COVID and one thing about the companies that had to respond, the fact that they had to move their lines that they were underway in developing, they had to move those lines aside and make room and put into production the COVID vaccine and the distribution. There's a couple of federal issues that I want to talk about, one in particularly, and I wanted to thank Congressman Arrington because he's been a true champion for us in COVID. But there's a very disturbing, it's a controversial proposal to the World Trade Organization Council for trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, and it's known as TRIPS. It would suspend the WTO obligations to protect intellectual property IP on a broad range of COVID-19 related technologies. What that means is we give our patents and we give the recipe for how on the mRNA, how we develop that, and we give it to other countries so that they could in turn begin to manufacture and distribute COVID vaccines. We are very concerned that this proposal is being proposed. It's backed by the current administration. And so through the help of our Texas congressional members, we're encouraging our members to weigh in and encourage that this does not occur, because it could open from intellectual property rights. It could open up on other products, other medical devices, and it's a very dangerous precedent for the United States to engage in. And this just really came on our radar screen a couple of weeks ago. So we are, if you have any connection, any contact, we would ask you to, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Pandemic and infectious diseases, it really has placed a spotlight on, I think, the life science industry in a very major way. We now have to look in a post-pandemic environment. What are some of the things we are going to need to be doing? Workforce is really going to be, I think, a very key ingredient. We've heard about telemedicine. We supported HB4 by 4 Price, and we hope that becomes a reality, and telemedicine is going to be very key. The ability to attract venture capital is going to be very key. The state of Texas used to be a flyover state, so they would make investments in biotech companies in California, in North Carolina, in some of the states where there's a very vibrant industry clusters, and they would fly over Texas and go to other places. Today, they are literally taking a very hard look at our companies here. In fact, our venture capital investment is continuing to increase, and it's been programs like the CPRIT programs. It's been the investments that the state of Texas has made. So as we move into a God bless you, as we move into a post-pandemic environment, it's going to be critical that we continue to have this nurturing environment. There was a bill that went through, one of the things that CPRIT taught, I think, our legislative body was it can be a good thing to take equity in companies, but we can now take the model of CPRIT where you do 20 years and a $6 billion investment in oncology. There was a mental health initiative that was being looked at this particular session, utilizing a CPRIT model. There was also another bill that was entitled Transcend that looked at infectious diseases and the preparedness for infectious diseases moving forward. So I think the state is now in a mindset that would be able to look at and make investments with CPRIT-like models moving forward. So pandemic, it's getting us ready, and all of our infectious disease folks, the virologists that we work with, this is not going to be the last pandemic. We have to be prepared for the next one, and I think that there are lessons learned that we can begin to look at. So THBI, 25 years of serving the industry. Our hope is that there are going to be opportunities to continue to grow the life science industry. As we work with the governor's office, we're hearing that the phones are ringing. Companies are looking at the state of Texas. The opportunities for rural Texas could be great because of the interest that Texas has. And just keep this in mind. As a researcher, and remember, we're talking about biotech companies that incorporate and hire the best and the best of the minds. And when a researcher gets off the plane, he or she will look around and say, all right, is this a place where I want to relocate my family to? Is this an environment that I want to work in? And I think that's the attractiveness of Texas. And so far, as we've seen by the numbers, we're continuing to demonstrate that here in the state of Texas. So thank you very much for your time today. It is a true honor to be here to speak to you and to give you our thoughts on the Texas life science industry. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. We good? Well, thank you all very much. Enjoy your lunch.